The man paid $3 for her, $3. The price of a warm meal, maybe two, if you knew where to eat. That's what Verity Holst was worth, according to Cyrus Pratt, who had kept her in his logging camp for 4 years, and decided, on a gray Tuesday morning in November of 1887, that she had become more trouble than she was useful. She stood in the middle of the trading post in Dunmore Creek, British Columbia, with her wrists tied together in front of her, using the same rough jute rope they used to bundle timber. Her dress was the color of old mud. Her hair had been plaited by someone who hadn't bothered to be gentle about it. She didn't look at anyone. She'd learned some time ago that looking at people only gave them permission to look back. The man who paid the $3 was named Fletcher Grouse. He was not a particularly large man, and he was not a particularly young one, somewhere past 40, with the kind of face that had been weathered by decades outdoors, rather than by any single hard thing. He ran a trap line northwest of Dunmore Creek, came into town twice a season for supplies, and was known, to the extent he was known at all, as someone who kept to himself and caused no trouble and had no family and seemed to prefer it that way. He hadn't come to the trading post looking for a girl. He'd come for lamp oil, a new axe handle, and a sack of dried beans. He almost walked back out when he saw what Cyrus Pratt was doing. Almost. $3, Fletcher said again quietly to no one in particular. He was counting out the coins before he'd made any conscious decision to do it. His hands moved on their own, which was something that happened to him sometimes, when his body understood something faster than his mind could catch up. Cyrus Pratt took the coins without making eye contact. He didn't seem ashamed exactly, more like bored. "She's not much of a cook," he offered, as though that were a useful thing to mention. "She's quiet, though. Quiet's something." Fletcher didn't respond to that. He looked at the rope around the girl's wrists, and then he looked at the hunting knife on his belt, and then he cut the rope without asking anyone's permission. The sound it made was very small. A few men in the trading post turned to watch. None of them said anything. The girl, Verity, looked at her wrists. There were red marks where the rope had been. She rubbed one thumb over the marks on the opposite wrist, slowly, the way you'd check something you didn't quite believe was real. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything at all. Fletcher picked up his axe handle from the counter and looked at her. "I'm going north," he said. "If you want to come, you can. If you don't, that's your right." Verity looked at the door. She looked at Cyrus Pratt, who had already pocketed the coins and turned away. She looked at the men along the wall, none of whom met her eyes. Then she followed Fletcher Grouse out into the November cold. The cabin was 3 hours on foot from Dunmore Creek, up a logging road that turned into a game trail, that turned into something that was barely a trail at all, and then you crossed a frozen creek and climbed a ridge, and there it was, tucked into a stand of Engelmann spruce like it was hiding. It was small. One room, a loft, a stone fireplace, 2 windows with oiled cloth instead of glass. It smelled like wood smoke and pine sap and something else, something animal and old trapped furs maybe, or just the smell of a place that had been lived in by one solitary person for a very long time. Fletcher set down his pack and started building up the fire. He did not explain the cabin to her. He did not explain himself. He simply moved through the space, doing the things that needed to be done. Feeding the fire, hanging his coat, filling the kettle from a barrel near the door, and he let Verity stand in the middle of the room and figure out what to do with herself. She stood there for a long time. She wasn't sure how long. The fire crackled, and the kettle started to hiss, and the feeling came back slowly into her fingers, which had gone white and numb on the walk up. Finally she said, "Where do you want me to sleep?" It wasn't a question, exactly. It was a practical inquiry, the way you'd ask about where to put a piece of furniture. Fletcher looked at her from across the room. "Loft," he said. "There's blankets up there. I sleep down here." Verity looked at the ladder up to the loft. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I'm old and my knees are bad," he said, and went back to the fire. She didn't smile, but something in her face shifted slightly, like a door that had been stuck unsticking just a little, not opening, not yet, just giving. The first week was not easy. Fletcher Grouse was not a talkative man under any circumstances, and he had never lived with anyone before, and he did not really know how to account for another person's presence in a space that had always been his alone. He found himself doing small, strange things, turning down the lamp before he'd finished what he was working on so the light wouldn't disturb her, or making more porridge than he meant to, or hesitating before going out in the morning in case she needed something, though he couldn't have said what that something might be. Verity, for her part, moved through the cabin like someone who expected every square foot of floor to have consequences. She stepped carefully. She kept to edges. She had a way of being present in a room while also making herself somehow smaller than she actually was, which was already small. She was slight and fine-boned and looked, Fletcher thought, like something that had been left in the cold too long. He found her on the third day cleaning the entire cabin, not asked, just doing it. She had found a rag somewhere and was working along the baseboards with a focused, silent intensity, like it was a job she'd been given and was afraid to do imperfectly. "You don't need to do that," Fletcher said. Verity didn't stop. "I know what happens when things aren't clean," she said. He left her to it. On the fifth day, she cooked. She went through his stores with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd spent years managing food for a large number of people and served him a venison stew that was, honestly, better than anything he'd made himself. He said so. She said. "Cyrus said I wasn't much of a cook." Fletcher looked at his bowl. "Cyrus Pratt doesn't know what he's talking about," he said. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Then she looked back at her own bowl. "No," she said quietly. "He usually doesn't." It was the evening of the 9th day when she asked him the question that stopped him cold. He'd been splitting kindling by the fire, not because he needed to, he had plenty, but because it was the kind of repetitive task that kept his hands busy while he thought. Verity was sitting at the other end of the table, mending a tear in her dress, which she'd been doing very precisely for the last half hour, the needle moving in small, even stitches. She said it without looking up from her sewing. "What do you do when someone upsets you?" Fletcher set the splitting wedge down. "I beg your pardon." "When someone makes you angry," she said, "what do you do about it?" He thought about it honestly. "I go outside," he said, "or I don't say anything. I wait for it to pass, and if it doesn't pass, it always passes," he said. Verity was quiet for a moment. Her needle kept moving. Then, "What about when you're very angry? The kind that doesn't feel like it's going to pass?" "Then I split kindling," he said. "Which is what I'm doing now, though I'm not angry." She looked up from her sewing at that. "You're not?" "No," she held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the dress. "With Cyrus," she said carefully, "when he was angry, there was always a moment just before. You could tell by how he held his shoulders." She paused. "I've been watching your shoulders." Fletcher sat very still. "Every day," she continued, her voice entirely steady. "I've been watching to figure out where to stand and when to move and when to be quiet. I've been trying to figure out the pattern." She smoothed the cloth with her thumb. "I haven't found one yet," Fletcher said after a moment. "There isn't one." "That's what I was afraid of," she said. But the way she said it. He understood slowly that she wasn't saying she was afraid of him. She was saying that the absence of a pattern was itself frightening. That she'd been trying to predict the shape of something and couldn't. And that uncertainty for Verity Holst was more alarming than any certainty she'd ever been given, no matter how terrible. She had been bracing for a blow that never came, and not knowing when it would come was its own kind of violence. "Verity," he said. She looked up. "I'm not going to hurt you." She looked at him with those careful measuring eyes. "Why not?" she said. Not as a challenge. Not even as a question, really. Just as something she genuinely did not understand and wanted to. Fletcher Grouse did not have an answer for that. He could not explain to her, in any way that would make immediate sense, why people didn't simply harm whoever was within reach when they could. He could not give her a theory of human decency that would hold up under the scrutiny of everything she'd already lived. So he didn't try. He said, "I don't know how to explain it to you right now, but I can show you if you give me time." Verity looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to her sewing. She didn't say she believed him, but she didn't leave. The days that followed were different and the same. Fletcher taught her the trapline, not because she needed to know it, but because he needed a reason to take her outside. And being outside seemed to do something for her that being inside couldn't. In the open air, under the enormous sky, with the snow and the spruce, and the particular silence that sits over a forest in deep winter. Verity was different. She lifted her face sometimes, she asked questions. She had a good eye for sign, animal tracks, disturbances in the snow, the way a snare was set. She learned things quickly and completely, and seemed to have the same focused mind for the wilderness that she'd applied to cleaning and cooking, which was to say, a very precise, attentive, serious mind. "You've been outside before," Fletcher observed, on the third day on the trap line. "Before Pratt." "Before Pratt," she agreed. "I grew up in the bush, east of Fort Langley. My father was a trapper." She paused. "He wasn't good at it," Fletcher said. "Were you?" She looked at the snare she was examining. "Better than him," she said. After that, he let her set some of the snares herself. She did it exactly right. There was a morning about 3 weeks in, when he came in from outside to find her standing at the window looking out at the yard. She was holding a cup of tea in both hands. The morning light came through the oiled cloth in a diffuse, yellowish way and settled around her. And she was just standing there, very still, her expression doing something he hadn't seen it do before. She looked, he thought, like she was resting. Like it was the first time in a long time she'd stood somewhere and not been preparing for something to go wrong. He didn't say anything. He just went to the fireplace and sat down and left her to it. She stood there for a long time, looking out at the snow. It was early December when Cyrus Pratt came back. Fletcher heard him coming before he saw him. The sound of someone moving through the tree line without any particular care for how much noise they made. He put down what he was doing and stood up and waited. There were two of them. Pratt and another man Fletcher didn't recognize, younger, with the look of someone hired for the size of him rather than any other quality. Pratt stopped at the edge of the yard. He looked at Fletcher, and then he looked at the cabin, and then he called out, "I want her back." "No," Fletcher said. "I've been thinking," Pratt said, "that I let her go too cheap." He had the tone of a man who had rehearsed this and believed it made him sound reasonable. "The deal wasn't fair. She's worth more than I took for her." "You set the price," Fletcher said, "and I'm changing it." Fletcher looked at him. "You can't change it." Pratt nodded at the large man beside him. "I think I can." Inside the cabin, Verity had heard the voices. She'd moved instinctively to the small window facing the yard and was watching through a gap in the oiled cloth. She recognized Pratt's posture before she recognized his face, the set of his shoulders, the particular forward lean. She knew every part of him. She'd been studying him for 4 years. She knew what came next, usually. She knew how Pratt moved when he was going to get what he wanted. She knew the body language of men who were certain. What she hadn't seen before was Fletcher. Fletcher didn't step back. He didn't adjust his stance or look at the larger man or show any sign that the calculation of the situation had changed with 2 against 1. He just stood there in the yard looking at Cyrus Pratt with the same expression he used for everything, which was a very level, very patient expression, and he said, "You should go." "Or what?" Pratt said. "Or this becomes something that ends badly for you," Fletcher said. "I don't want that." "But you need to decide what you want." The large man moved. Fletcher moved faster, not dramatically, not with anything wasted. And there was a brief, efficient altercation that Verity watched through the gap in the cloth, with her heart going very fast and her hands entirely still. She had spent 4 years being afraid every time there was violence near her. She was still afraid now. But it was a different kind of fear, one that was doing something strange to her chest, tight and urgent, not for herself. She was afraid for Fletcher. That was new. When it was over, and it was over quickly, and it went the way she had somehow not allowed herself to hope it would go. Pratt was on the ground in the snow, with the large man standing 6 feet away, looking like he'd reconsidered his life choices. "Go," Fletcher said. He wasn't breathing hard. Pratt went. Verity came out of the cabin before he'd turned around. She crossed the yard through the snow and stopped in front of him and looked at him with an expression that was doing many things at once, and she said, her voice steady, the way her voice always was, steady all the way through, "Are you hurt?" "No," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer, checking. Then she said, "I should have come out sooner." "There was nothing for you to do." "There was something," she said. "I could have been out here." He understood what she meant. Not that she could have helped practically. that she would have been beside him, that she wanted to have been. He didn't know what to do with that. They stood in the yard for a moment with the snow coming down around them, soft and indifferent, covering the scuff marks in the ground where Pratt had fallen. "He'll come back," she said. "Maybe," Fletcher said, "and maybe not. If he does, we'll deal with it," he said. She looked at him. "We," she repeated. "Yes," he said, "if that's what you want." The words sat in the air between them, plain and quiet. It was not a grand offer. It was not a promise of anything dramatic. It was just a word. We spoken in a yard full of snow by a man who was not sure he knew how to share a life with anyone, offered to a girl who was not sure she knew how to be in one. Verity was quiet for a long moment. The snow fell. Somewhere in the spruce trees, a Clark's nutcracker called out once and went silent. "I've been watching your shoulders again," she said. "And?" "They look the same as they always do," she said. "The same as when you're sitting by the fire. The same as when you're on the trap line." She paused. Pratt's shoulders looked different every time he was going to do something. "Yours never change." "I told you there wasn't a pattern," he said. "I know," she said. "I think that might actually be the pattern." She turned and walked back toward the cabin. At the door she stopped and looked back at him over her shoulder, and for just a second, the most ordinary second, snow and spruce and the smell of wood smoke on the cold air, she looked like someone who was beginning, slowly and carefully and with great caution, to believe that she was going to be all right. "The stew is going to be cold if you stand out there much longer," she said. And Fletcher Grouse, who had lived alone for 20 years and had made his peace with it, walked back across the yard toward the warm light in the window.